For the past 3 summers, I've been living in an old ranger's cabin on the western edge of Washington State, surrounded by the dense forests of Olympic National Park. When I fled the city, all I wanted was solitude. That's all I was searching for. But after 3 years of living deep in these woods, in a cabin that seems to breathe with the wind, I've come to understand. Solitude isn't something everyone can endure. It chooses you. Wanting it isn't enough. It seeps in, settles in your veins, slowly takes over. Even your thoughts begin to whisper. Everything slows down, like time, like your heartbeat. Since I started living in this 2-room cabin, I wake every morning to the sound of the wind howling through the trees. There's no electricity, no phone signal. I have a radio, but most of the time, I don't even turn it on. Out here, nature is my only friend, and sometimes, silence. That morning, the rain felt like it had sworn to wash away the sky. When I stepped out onto the porch, the fog was still drifting among the trees. I was drinking my coffee, cold, sharp, biting air. Then I noticed movement at the end of the trail in front of me. Someone was walking through the shadows. A man, stumbling, slogging through the mud, wearing nothing but a thin, soaking wet jacket. No hat, no hood, no protection. Just an old backpack in his hand. Like someone had tossed him into this forest and left him. Like he didn't belong here. We locked eyes. But that look, I can't explain it. When you see a stranger, you feel something. Discomfort, caution, maybe even a sense of danger. But his eyes, there was nothing. No fear, no curiosity, no intent. His eyes opened into a void. He didn't say a word, just kept walking, disappeared into the forest. But something started inside me at that moment, a feeling that lasted the entire day. Something nameless, an unease, a tension, like an instinctive alarm going off deep inside. The sky never cleared that day. Rain kept falling. Inside, the fire in the wood stove crackled softly. It was long past midnight. The book I'd been reading rested on my knees, half closed. I was drifting off when there was a knock at the door, firm, slow, and deliberate. 3 knocks. The sound inside me spread across the whole room. My skin bristled. Even the crackling fire faded into the background. I stood up slowly, quietly picked up my rifle, peered out the small window in the door. It was him. But something was very different. He wasn't moving. The rain was still coming down, but the wetness on his face didn't look like rain. His skin was pale, gray, cracked. His lips were slightly parted, arms hanging limply at his sides, shoulders slumped, like he'd been standing there for hours, expressionless. But it wasn't just an absence of emotion. It was like an absence of identity, as if there was no one there, just a body. "Are you okay?" I asked without opening the door. "I'm cold," he said. His voice, it was human, but it didn't sound like a person, more like a recording, flat, emotionless. No urgency, no hope, no despair, just a line. "Can I come in?" I held my breath. My fingers tightened around the trigger. You didn't need to be trained to know something was very wrong. There was something off about this man. "No," I said. "There's a ranger cabin nearby. Go there." He tilted his head slightly, not like he understood, more like he'd heard a sound. I looked out the window again. He hadn't left. He'd sat down on the old porch chair, still, arms at his sides, eyes fixed on the glass. On me, time seemed to stop. I felt a scream pass through me, but outside, I was silent. I grabbed the rifle again, took a deep breath, opened the window slightly. "Go away," I shouted. "Now, or I'll call the police." He didn't flinch, didn't blink, still as a stone, solid as a statue. Finally, I fired up the radio and pushed for signal. I reached the ranger station. They said they were on their way. That hour felt like a lifetime. Every time I looked, he was still there. Only once did he blink. And in that instant, something inside me collapsed. At last the Rangers arrived. Even under the beam of their flashlights, he didn't get up, didn't run, just lifted his head, looked silently. No ID, no notes, no clues, no documents. It was like someone had erased him. I didn't hear him say a word as they took him. He just walked. Later, they gave me some information. This man went missing a few days ago in another part of the park. We have no idea how he got all the way here. But the strange part is this. He shouldn't have been able to walk at all. He's been partially paralyzed in his left leg for years, ever since a serious accident. My knees nearly buckled, because the man who had stood for hours on my porch that night shouldn't have been able to stand at all. That line still echoes in my mind. The forest is quiet. My cabin is dark again. But something inside me has shifted, because now I know. Sometimes solitude doesn't choose you. Sometimes it finds you. And you, if someone knocked on your door that night, would you have had the courage to open it? I've been living for 3 summers now in a small cabin by the lake in the northern part of Arkansas, deep in the woods. I left city life behind long ago. I always thought living in isolated places, far from the noise, the crowds, and the chaos, was peaceful. Until what happened last summer completely changed my mind. The cabin is a single-story old structure, hidden at the edge of the forest. Next to it, there's a rusty dock. Swimming in the lake every morning had become a routine. I use a generator for electricity and draw water from a small nearby spring. There's no cell reception here. The nearest settlement is about an hour's drive away. Summer nights here are different. The forest makes entirely different sounds. Frogs croaking, cicadas buzzing, the distant hoot of an owl. But most importantly, the silence. That's what I loved about this place. It was the last days of July. The heat during the day had become unbearable, but the breeze from the lake brought a bit of coolness in the evenings. That night, around 10 o'clock, I was sitting on the porch, listening to the chorus of frogs echoing across the lake. I had a glass of iced tea in my hand, and on the table was an old radio that barely picked up any signal. It was playing country songs with a low hiss. Just as I was thinking of heading inside, I heard a soft rustle from the side of the cabin. I figured it might be a raccoon or a deer. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the woods. The shadows of the trees stretched long, and the moonlight glistened off the lake. But there was nothing where the sound had come from. I returned to the porch, but the unease lingered. About half an hour later, I heard something much clearer. The sound of footsteps. Yes, definitely the crunch of someone stepping on dry twigs. A chill ran down my spine. No one ever came down this forest path, especially not at night. I moved toward the door and peeked through the window. In the moonlight, I saw a shadow moving near the cabin wall. My hand instinctively reached for the old rifle. I didn't want to fire it, but when you're alone out here, even the slightest suspicion means danger. I fired 2 warning shots into the air. I waited in silence for a few minutes. I figured that would be enough and went back inside. Just as I was getting ready for bed, I heard the floorboards of the porch creak. My heart was pounding out of my chest. Without turning on the light, I grabbed the rifle. I looked out the window beside the door, and there, bathed in moonlight, stood someone. Their back was to me, tall, thin, wearing a hat, standing perfectly still. I cleared my throat and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The man didn't even turn. My hand began to tremble. Was this a prank? Or just someone lost? I waited a few more seconds, then called out again. "This is private property. What do you want?" This time he slowly turned his head, but I couldn't see his face clearly. The shadow of his hat obscured his eyes. All he did was take one step toward the edge of the porch and keep looking at me. When our eyes met, there was no aggression or remorse on his face, just confusion. His lips moved, and in a muffled voice, he said he was lost. I didn't lower the rifle. Just the fact that this man was standing on my porch in the middle of the night was disturbing enough. Without taking my eyes off him, I stepped back and checked the door bolt. I watched him through the window for a while. He neither approached nor left. As the moonlight shifted behind drifting clouds, his silhouette became harder to make out. It was as if he was waiting, studying the cabin. Minutes passed. He eventually walked to the corner of the porch and crouched down. His movements were calm, yet carried a strange carelessness. Was that a stick in his hand, or just a fallen branch? I couldn't quite tell. I turned off all the lights inside and waited. No sounds, just the frogs echoing across the lake and the wind brushing against the leaves. My eyes began to sting from exhaustion when the porch creaked again. I looked through the window. He was still there, facing the lake now, completely still. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He wasn't coming closer, nor leaving. It was like he meant to stay the night there. I slowly backed away and grabbed the old radio from the corner of the room. There's no cell service here, but the radio connects me to forest rangers and the town's security team around the lake. I didn't move a muscle until the team arrived. Finally, headlights appeared through the woods. The vehicle rolled slowly down the lakeside path and stopped in front of the porch. The man turned his head when the lights hit him. He didn't run. He didn't hide. Two security officers stepped out of the car, flashlights in hand, and approached him. There was a brief exchange, but all I could hear was a muffled, "My truck broke down." One of the officers spoke through the radio. "No problem. Just someone who lost his way. We'll take him back to town." Once they were gone, the cabin sank back into silence. But after that night, I never felt as comfortable sitting by the lake again. I moved out not long after that. This is a small, single-story hunting cabin deep in the forest, near Montana's northern border. The cabin was left to me by my father. After he passed away, I didn't visit it for several years, but at the beginning of last summer, after a string of disappointments in the city, I suddenly found myself here. I had only meant to clear my head for a few weeks. Then days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Living here is strangely healing. No electricity, no phone signal. Water comes from a small well behind the cabin. No sound, no people. Just the wind, the leaves, and your own breath. That night, it was mid-September. The weather had started to get cold. I had lit the stove inside the cabin. Outside, it was nearly freezing. A crackly station barely came through on the old radio. I was reading a book, holding a cup of tea. It was nearly 1 a.m. I thought I'd get sleepy soon, when I was startled by a faint tapping sound from outside. Sometimes it's cats or squirrels, I know that. But this was a little different. It was as if a fingernail had touched a wooden surface, maybe the window. I stood up. turned off the lamp and approached the window. Once my eyes adjusted to the dark, I looked out. There was no moon that night. The clouds were heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it outside the window. Nothing. But the unease inside me echoed louder than the sound itself. I checked the damp surface around the window. No trace of anything. I turned around and checked the door latch. Everything was in place. But for some reason, I felt an unshakable discomfort. I told myself, "You imagined it." I went back and sat in the chair by the stove. Minutes passed. The ceiling started creaking. The beams of the cabin make those sounds on cold nights. I'm used to it. But among those creaks, there was something else. Footsteps, very faint, very rhythmic, like heavy boots stepping on soil. They were getting closer, then stopping. I froze. The cabin's windows are thick but small. I quietly approached the one just to the left of the door. Looked out, but saw nothing. The darkness was dense. I didn't turn the flashlight back on. This time I didn't want to be seen. I moved toward the rifle. It's old, but still works. Always stays near me because out here, there's no one you can call for help. A few more minutes passed. Silence returned. Just as I was about to say, I imagined it. A sound came from the back of the cabin. The grating noise of something metallic being dragged. There's a shed back there, from my father's time. It holds old barrels, rusty tools. I picked up the rifle and quietly unlatched the door. Held my breath and slowly moved along the side of the cabin toward the back. The cold air hit my face. The scent of pine had grown sharp. When I reached the shed, I turned on the flashlight and pointed it inside. The door was ajar. I gently pushed it open with my hand. No one was inside, but something caught my eye. On the ground, among the dry pine needles, there were tracks, heavy boot prints. Still fresh at that point. Every hair on my body stood up. I quickly backed away and returned to the cabin. Closed the door and checked the latch 3 times. Turned off all the lamps inside. Placed the rifle on my lap. I opened my ears to the whole forest. I could hear even my heartbeat. And then, another sound from the porch. Footsteps. Clear, definite. Someone stepping onto the wooden stairs. I took a deep breath and looked out the window. Someone was standing there, right in front of the cabin, holding something in their hand. Like a flashlight, but not turned on. Just standing there silently, looking at the cabin. Their hood was up, face not visible. Slightly hunched back, odd posture. But the most disturbing part was this. It was 1 a.m, in the middle of the forest, with no explanation, and they were standing at my door. I just watched, and they didn't move, as if they had no intention of doing so. Then they turned on the flashlight, pointed it directly at the window, right at the spot where my eyes were. The light suddenly hit my eyes. We locked gazes even with the flashlight pointed at my face. I could see their silhouette. There was no panic in their posture, just a look. Not one of recognition, but of trying to understand. But then, within seconds, the expression in their eyes changed, as if they suddenly realized what they were looking at. They quickly lowered the flashlight, stepped back a few paces, stumbled slightly. Then, without saying a word, turned around and walked toward the forest darkness. First briskly, then almost running. I was still by the window, my heart pounding out of my chest. My hands were shaking. That brief moment felt like it lasted hours, and that night, I realized for the first time how living here had made me invisible. I stayed just 1 more week after that night. Then I packed my suitcase, locked the door, and left that forest behind.